Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you part 7 of my Zerg vs Tyranids matchup. This part will cover the tactics used by each side and will be the final section before I give my final thoughts. As usual, I will start by addressing a issue from former videos, in particular where I said that there's 3 Tyranid hive fleets. This is kinda misleading, though potentially technically true. The main 3 that you hear about are Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan, which are the 3 that I've been talking about. But for one, Behemoth was destroyed, leaving only a remnant to try and rebuild. The thing is that these quote-unquote main fleets are not all of the fleets. There's a bunch of lesser fleets, including Ouroboros, Tiamat, and several fleets referred to collectively as Colossus, among others. So yeah, there's a lot of fleets for the Tyranids out there, which explains this map for their invasion path through the galaxy. Obviously, there's more than 3 avenues coming in. Another thing I want to clarify is how the Tyranid hive mind works. As I mentioned before, the hive mind exerts complete control over all Tyranids within its sphere of influence, which is extended via things like hive tyrants. There's a couple things that come out of this. For one, if a psychic nexus unit like a hive tyrant is killed, the psychic backlash is at a minimum really disorienting for all the Tyranids that were connected to it, and may even actually kill them outright. The other thing to note is that Tyranids can operate outside the hive mind, but create smaller, independently controlled group minds called brood minds. This occurs when gene stealers are doing their thing, and whenever a group of Tyranids is separated from their fleet, but still have a psychic nexus unit around to maintain the connection. From what I can tell, these brood minds operate more like the Zerg hive mind, in that they don't have complete control over the units, they basically just give out orders psychically. Alright, on to the tactical breakdown. I'll start with the Zerg. Zerg strategy is all about lightning attacks from hopefully unprepared angles. To accomplish this, they use quick-moving ground and aerial units, burrowing units, and their super accurate warp jumps that I've discussed earlier. Your typical Zerg invasion will involve a fleet of Leviathans showing up on your doorstep and then raining down drop pods full of ground units, Zerglings and Hydralisks and Ultralisks, etc. All the things that they evolve into as well, of course. While swarms of Mutalisks, Corruptors, and Scourge, again with all their evolutions, thrash anything airborne. Each of these units has evolutions that change their attributes and behaviors, and Zerg are capable of evolving even mid-battle to better counter what they are facing. Beyond that, though, the Zerg are coordinated by Kerrigan, the Queen of Blades, who keeps them focused upon specific goals and targets, though they can also be coordinated by lesser things like Cerebrits and Hive Queens. Once on the ground with an established foothold, Zerg will work to establish a base and spread their creep, which helps gather nutrients from the environment and maintain their structures. Generally speaking, the goal of a Zerg invasion is actually to conquer whatever world that they're on. So they'll build a lot of permanent infrastructure with the expectation that when they take the planet, the whole thing can then be used for a long time to serve the hive. Part of the infrastructure that the Zerg will build up is a network of some combination of Zerg queens and Cerebrits, which will help extend the hive mind control over, ultimately, the whole world. Finally, something I want to mention is that if you manage to actually fight off a Zerg invasion, you really want to kill them all, because any remnant will attempt to sneakily gather resources and build up their numbers so they can attack again. Remember that all these Zerg can just evolve into other Zerg as the needs arise, so while it's not really a game mechanic for like Zerglings to turn back into larvae and then into an Ultralisk or something like that, they're totally capable of that given, their nutrients and stuff. Turns out a Zergling takes way less resources to create in terms of nutrients and such than, a building. On to the Tyranids. I've linked in the description a fully spelled out video series on what a Tyranid invasion looks like, but it's several hours long in total, so I'll give you the ultra short version. The first part of a Tyranid invasion is reconnaissance. Either they'll use Gene Stealers, Lictors, or Leapers, and these Tyranids will sneak units onto targeted worlds to gain information about the world and begin some kind of insurgency if they can. Gene Stealers will build whole cults by infesting worms into locals that connect them to a brood mind and then turn them into Tyranid hybrids. Leapers and Lictors will mainly just pick off stragglers and perform reconnaissance. The second part of an invasion is also part of their faster than light travel, as mentioned before. They use a narval to create a gravity corridor for their fleet and use that to quickly travel to the vicinity of a target world while the gravity corridor itself wreaks havoc on the targeted system, causing massive earthquakes, tidal forces, and flooding. The fleet will then begin the relatively slow crawl that might take weeks, months, or even years to cover the remaining distance. During this time, the fleet will basically just get a data dump from the reconnaissance forces, if there are any, and tailor their units that they prepare accordingly. This is also when the shadow and the warp comes into play, because That's an important part of their strategy. It, at minimum, shuts down psychic communication over long distances so that the targeted world can't call for help. The third part is the actual invasion, where they begin raining down spores upon the targeted planet, flooding it with millions of relatively basic units, mostly hormigons, which work to establish whatever foothold they can while laying hundreds of eggs each and being generally entirely disposable. They don't even live that long if unmolested. In the next phase of the invasion, they'll begin making spawning pools in whatever areas they manage to capture, into which they'll throw any and all biomatter they can get a hold of, and begin making bigger and bigger units. From what I can dig up, this is how the largest ground units are produced, as spore drop pods can only carry so much, so the largest have to be made on site. Finally, once they manage to crush all defenses on the targeted world, the ships in orbit will begin dropping giant umbilicals down to the surface, which they will use like vacuum hoses to suck up all the biomatter on the world, including all flora, fauna, living, dead, bacteria, water, and even ultimately atmosphere before leaving the planet just a dead husk and moving on. How long this all takes is kind of unclear, in part because it varies wildly depending on how effective the defense of a given world is, but uncontested, the best time frame I can dig up is it would take about 80 days to fully eat a world and move on. For the purposes of this comparison, I'm going to be focusing entirely upon Hive Fleet invasions, so they're all perfectly coordinated via the hive mind, and while there's certainly some insidious strategies that get used by the Tyranids against the other Warhammer 40k factions, I don't think that most of these will be all that effective against the Zerg, since they're another hive mind, and they don't have a ton of independent individuals that can be manipulated or go missing and not be noticed, so I think that the Tyranid tactics would be mostly the standard just overwhelm and eat method, as opposed to building up gene stoler cults and using them to undermine the world's populations. Finally, just like the Zerg, if you manage to fight off the Tyranids via any method other than exterminatus, you'll want to make sure that you get them all, because if something like a hive tyrant survives, they'll build a spawning pool underground and begin nabbing whatever biomass they can before emerging and starting the whole invasion over again. Both sides are kind of like cockroaches in that way. One last thing that I want to mention is that both sides are controlled by intelligent hive minds. This means that neither side is stupid, and they will absolutely prioritize important targets. This also means that should either side discover a psychic control nexus unit like a hive tyrant or a Cerebrit or the Queen of Blades herself, that will immediately become priority target number one, since if you take that out, you basically just win that battle, at least in that particular fight. You take out the Queen of Blades and you might win outright. And that's all I've got for you on this section. Pretty straightforward strategically on each side, since neither side has nepotism or ego to deal with, so there's no incompetent commanders or anything like that. And when disconnected from the hive mind, both sides are ultimately instinctive predators who will behave much as they did when connected to the hive mind, just on an individual basis, so they're just, way less coordinated. As always, let me know if I missed anything important in the comments, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.